Fearing a potential conflict in Asia, Western companies are looking to move productions out of Taiwan, but severing ties with the self-ruled island would come at a high price for manufacturers. Will Apple and other tech giants be willing to pay the price? Why is Taiwan an indispensable piece of the global economy? How are the economic relationships between the United States, mainland China, and Taiwan Island intertwined? In the days after then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan last year, Taiwanese suppliers to U.S. tech giants including Apple, Google, Meta, and Amazon were inundated with requests from their customers. Could they produce from outside Taiwan to secure supplies in case Beijing went to war over the island? Pelosi's visit has sparked more than a diplomatic spat between Washington and Beijing, which responded to her trip with unprecedented military exercises around Taiwan. It's triggered a tech industry crisis which might now threaten the global electronic supply chain, according to Nikkei Asia and Financial Times. If anyone hits Taiwan or there is a serious disruption, the tech and electronics industry worldwide is basically screwed, says He Zhongfan, founder of chip and material testing provider MA Tech. Taiwan is best known for making cutting-edge semiconductors, but its companies also turn out other crucial components from printed circuit boards to advanced camera lenses, and they run huge device assembly operations in China. This has created a triangle of critical interdependence between Taiwan, China, and the US that has deepened even as tensions between Beijing, Washington, and Taipei have risen. To understand why, take a look inside the ubiquitous iPhone. It is one of the most successful consumer devices of all times. 2.4 billion units sold since launch in 2007, racking up over $1 trillion in revenue for Apple in 15 years. Its success rests on a sprawling Asian supply chain producing chips, displays, speakers, and more on an almost unimaginable scale. At its heart lie both mainland China and Taiwan. The iPhone's components reveal just how tightly bound the supply chains of the US, China, and Taiwan have become. Each iPhone needs some 1,500 components. Nearly 70% of Apple's top suppliers, making everything from processors to casings, are headquartered in either China, 26%, Taiwan, 23%, or the US, 18%. Japan, 17%, and South Korea, 7% round out the top 5. The most valuable components, including car processors, 5G modems, Wi-Fi chips, and premium camera lenses, are made in Taiwan by Taiwanese companies. All told, the island suppliers account for nearly $200 or 36% of the total materials bills for each iPhone. These chips, however, are designed by Apple or other US, Japanese, or European chips developers such as Qualcomm, Sony, and Bosch. High-performance materials are also provided by American makers such as display glass from Corning and adhesive from 3M. Chinese suppliers are concentrated in less technologically demanding areas like product assembly and mechanical parts. The number of China-based suppliers has overtaken all other countries and regions to become the largest supplying source by number of companies over the past few years. They have also started to move up the supply chain. China's Luxshare precision industry, originally a component supplier to Apple, started to build iPhones in 2021. Its display champion, BOE Technology Group, now makes some of the advanced OLED screens for iPhones, previously the exclusive domains of South Korean manufacturers. Chinese camera lens maker Sunny Optical Technology appeared for the first time in the 2023 supplier list, eating into a market that formerly belonged to only to Taiwanese players. China is also where 95% of all iPhones are assembled, a figure that has changed little since its launch. The country is a major market for iPhone too, providing around a fifth of its total annual revenue. Complicating the picture is the fact that many Taiwanese and US suppliers serve Apple from hundreds of facilities in mainland China. Without any of these components, an iPhone would not be an iPhone. But a formula that has worked for a decade and a half is being to put the test as geopolitical tensions rewrite the rules of tech manufacturing. G7 leaders meeting in Japan this month vowed to reduce excessive dependencies in our critical supply chains. Washington is determined to claw back advanced chip productions from Asia, while Beijing is racing to establish its own tech supremacy. Taiwan is caught in the middle of this contest. In early December, standing under the blinding Arizona sun, Apple CEO Tim Cook took the stage with US President Joe Biden to celebrate a milestone. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation was moving equipment into its new $40 billion chip plants in Phoenix, the Taiwanese contract chip maker's first plant in the US in more than 20 years. This is an incredibly significant moment. It's a chance for the United States to usher in a new era in advanced manufacturing. Cook told the crowd of assembled politicians and tech industry heavyweights. TSMC, the world's biggest contract chip makers, plan to make some of its most advanced semiconductors on US soil starting next year. And as one of the plant's first consumers, Apple will be able to stamp Made in America on its car chips for the first time ever. Left unsaid was that advanced semiconductors like these are only a small part of the electronic supply chain. A single smartphone requires a wide range of chips, including a host of less advanced companion chips, over 1,500 components in all, not to mention final assembly, all of which are concentrated in Asia, particularly China and Taiwan. The COVID pandemic revealed the logistical weak point of the international supply chain, which was built up over decades of globalization. Geopolitical tensions, more specifically the threat of war over Taiwan, are heaping additional pressure on tech companies to change how they operate. In one indication of the nervousness, a top US Air Force general recently predicted America and China are likely to go to war over Taiwan in 2025. 2 years ago, due to Trump's trade war, consumers told us they wanted out of China production options. So we decided to enlarge manufacturing capacity in Taiwan, our home base, said an executive with Unimicron Technology, a printed circuit board maker supplying to Apple, Intel, and others. Then, as the company was in the midst of a multi-billion-dollar expansion in Taiwan, policy visited Taipei last August. An infuriated Beijing, which considers the island part of its territory, responded by conducting live military drills off Taiwan's coast, and Unimicron's clients grew nervous. Our customers then said they wanted some production alternatives that are outside of China and also out of Taiwan over fears of a war. The executive said, "We were stunned and speechless." And so were a lot of our peers. How can the supply chain be moved out of China and Taiwan? The majority of electronic supply chains are here. Since the middle of last year, Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, Meta, Google, and Amazon have all requested additional production capacity outside of China and Taiwan. Several tech executives told Nikkei Asia, HP and Dell, the world's second and third biggest makers of notebook computers, told their suppliers specifically to start building capacity in Southeast Asia. Dell even aimed to phase out made-in-China chips by 2024. We have a business contingency plan, the so-called BCP, to prepare for supply chain disruptions such as a war, an executive at chip testing equipment maker, Advantest of Japan, told Nikkei Asia. But if a military conflict really happens here in the Taiwan Strait, honestly, I think any BCP would be totally useless. It would be doomsday for the chip supply chain, and no one ever wants to imagine that happening. AMD said it worked continuously with suppliers to improve business continuity plans, including the important goal of geographical diversification. Intel said it has consistently supported its suppliers' long-standing efforts toward diversification, which were not related to Pelosi Taiwan visit. NVIDIA declined to comment. Dell has said previously that it continuously explores supply chain diversification across the globe. HP said it has a robust global supply chain. Even without a full-scale war, disruption from, say, a Chinese blockade of Taiwan could cause serious global turmoil. According to a Semiconductor Industry Association estimate, a disruption in the production of logic chips at contract chip makers in Taiwan could cause nearly $500 million in lost revenues for electronic device manufacturers that depend on this supply. A recent estimate by Hordium Group said a Taiwan conflict would put well over $2 trillion of economic activity at risk. People underestimate Taiwan's position in the supply chain. It's much more than just about semiconductors. We have a very complete supply chain from chips, components, PCBs, printed circuit boards, casings, lenses to assembly, anything you can think of. A senior executive at Compal Electronics, a vital product assembler to Dell, HP, and Apple said, "If there is military friction happening to Taiwan, the entire global supply chain would collapse for sure." Such a scenario, in other words, would leave Apple with Made in America chips and no devices to put them in. At first, fears over a possible conflict came largely from Western clients, but now even Taiwanese companies are getting nervous about developments across the strait. Beijing concluded another round of military exercises on April the 10th, encircling Taiwan in protest against Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen's meeting with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California. The three-day drills included 91 incursions in a day. We grew in tandem with China's reform and opening up in the past several decades, but now the good old days are over. It's becoming obvious that Beijing puts politics over economic growth, said an executive at an Apple supplier whose facilities in China employ hundreds of thousands of workers. Our strategy is to lay low to accelerate production shift to Southeast Asia and India, and divert our money gradually from China in the next few years. Gradually is the operative word for many companies looking to diversify their supply chains, whether they want it to be or not. It takes at least 3 years in some countries and even 5 years in others to build a semiconductor plant from start to finish, and then it needs to start operation, said Benjamin Han, an executive for China and Southeast Asia at Germany's MAX, a chemical and material group. Sometimes there are some misunderstandings that this supply chain shift could happen overnight because of some geopolitical issue, but it could take us at least 5 years and even more than 10 years to see some more fundamental shift. Washington is attempting to speed the process along with a focus on chips. It is offering incentives to encourage companies like TSMC and Samsung of South Korea to help build up America's semiconductor industry. TSMC plants in Arizona, which will make ultra-advanced 3-nanometer chips that can be used in supercomputers, smartphones, cars, fighter jets, and military equipment, is seen as one of the crowning achievements of this push. This is most obvious in advanced microchips. TSMC and its smaller Taiwanese peers control 2/3 of the world's market for contract chip making, turning the semiconductor designs of Apple, Google, and others into physical chips. As global leaders in cutting-edge chip technology, their output is indispensable for the production of everything from Chinese smartphones to American fighter jets. Apple's Made in America chips, mounted on Taiwanese-made printed circuit boards, may well find their way to China before ending up in a smartphone or laptop bound for the US. Even where US companies appear to be making progress in reducing their reliance on China, the situation is less than straightforward. Apple, for example, has spent years urging its supplier to build capacity outside of China and has at least some alternative production capacity for all of its main product lines in countries such as India and Vietnam. But more than 80% of Apple's top 188 suppliers still have at least one facility serving the company in China, according to a Nikkei Asia FT analysis of the latest annual list published by Apple in 2023. Many key suppliers, including 3M, ON Semiconductors, Foxconn, and Luxshare, have 3 or more production sites in the country. In total, there are more than 270 manufacturing facilities making components or providing manufacturing services to Apple in China. Still the largest supply chain hub. In Taiwan, more than 70 sites are serving Apple, mainly making various chips, high-end chip substrates, printed circuit boards, and premium camera lenses, as well as providing chip packaging and testing services. Apple spent more than a decade building the world's most sophisticated tech supply chain, trading security and resilience for efficiencies and low cost. Plenty of other global companies followed suit, putting China and Taiwan at the heart of their manufacturing strategy. Now that the time has come to rethink this approach, suppliers and their clients are grappling with the complexity and cost of the task before them. Suppliers who have met with Apple's procurement team say they have been asked to do the impossible, come up with a way to make parts in other countries at the same price as in China and Taiwan. We are often very puzzled after wrapping up those meetings. We really want to escape them, an executive close to Foxconn said. Apple wants the price of components to go into the Indian assembled iPhone to be the same as in China. But how is that going to be possible? You will need to hire new people. You may need to build a new factory or at least ship components from abroad. And then you would have additional logistic costs. Decoupling from China would not be cheap, but severing ties with Taiwan would come at an even higher price. Would anyone be prepared to pay for it? Now the time for the world affairs has come to an end. We will bring you more in future episodes. Thank you so much for your attention. Goodbye and see you next time.